Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I hope you guys are having a great morning so far. Welcome to day 5 of ACU's virtual conference. I'm Suzanne Spear, the Senior Director of Workforce Development here at ACU, and I am going to be serving as your moderator for today's session, Chief Workforce Officers, who, what, when, and why. So before we get started, we have to do some housekeeping items, and this session is available for CME credits. In order to receive the credit, we are going to be checking attendance for this session, as well as having folks complete the session evaluation that pops up at the end of the session. When you close out WebEx, you'll have a pop-up a session evaluation that comes up, and in order to receive the credit, you will have to fill the session evaluation out as well. Even if you aren't applying for CME credit, we would love for you to complete the session evaluation, as your feedback is really important to us and we really value that. So go ahead and fill that out, and we really, really appreciate that for you guys doing that for us. Some other housekeeping items is, first of all, we would love for you to ask questions. Everybody is muted, but you can put your questions in either the chat or the Q&A box throughout the session, and then we'll have a chance at the very end to get to those. We are recording, and so we want you, A, to know that, and B, that this session recording will be available about 3 days after the session is completed. So middle of next week, it'll be available on the Crowd Compass app. And if you haven't, I know most of you have checked into that, but we would love for you to check that out. It's available through that app. And during the session, if you are having any technical support issues or need technical support, we would encourage you to put a question in the Q&A box, and Mariah Blake, who is our host, will get back to you and answer any technical questions that you have. Again, please fill out the evaluation at the end. We would greatly appreciate it. We have a fantastic lineup of presenters today. We have a couple of our folks that we have been working with for a while. We've got Rosa Augusto, who is the Chief Talent and Learning Officer at Urban Health Plan, as well as Kathy Brieger, who is the Executive Director of the Plaintree Institute and the Chief of Workforce Development at HRH Care. They are both, they are both from New York, but in various parts of New York, rural and urban, and they both are with larger health systems, but what we want you to take away is that they started in their positions when their health centers were much smaller. And so if you are with a smaller health center and you were thinking, gosh, I can't make this work because we're so much smaller, they started this work when their health centers were much smaller. So just keep that in mind as we go along. We also have Gerard Jolly, who is the Director of Career Advancement Strategies at the National Association of Community Health Centers, as well as Michelle Fernandez, who is the Senior Training Specialist at the Association of Clinicians for the Underserved. So yes, she's a staffer here at ACU. So with that, you now know our fantastic lineup today of all of our presenters, and we're having some webcam difficulties with a couple of our presenters, but they are all here and you can hear them all clearly. So with that, I'm going to hand the ball over to Michelle, and she is going to get us started with our slides. So with that, Michelle, you have the ball now.
Okay, perfect. I hope everyone can see me. I can see myself, but I don't know if all of you can see me, but
yes,
hopefully
we can see you.
Okay, great. So I will be advancing the slides, but I'm going to pass it over to Gerard. He is going to go over our learning objectives, and then there's going to be a quick poll.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you, Suzanne. I do want to take sort of speaker's privilege and publicly congratulate Suzanne on her recent promotion. In all of the collaborative efforts between ACU, CHC Inc., and NAC, on Workforce, I get to see firsthand just how talented, hardworking, and insightful Suzanne is, and more importantly to me, how much she cares about the health center workforce. So I'm glad to see your efforts recognized in this way, Suzanne. So just want to extend congratulations to you. Recruiting, developing, and retaining a talented health center workforce, clinically, operationally, administratively, was a challenging assignment even before COVID struck. And as health centers fully implement team-based care and value-based care and integrated care for the most vulnerable populations, there's a great deal of complexity that's involved, to say the least. With COVID, the rapid acceleration of telehealth implementation and the growing attention to health inequities has further complicated the need for a strategic, agile role to ensure that the goals of achieving a highly qualified workforce that reflects the populations that health centers served certainly is achieved. And that is where the Chief Workforce Officer role comes in. During our session today, we hope that you will leave with an understanding of how a Chief Workforce Officer benefits health center patients and staff, that you'll take the opportunity to examine core competencies of a Chief Workforce Officer that NAC and ACU have been able to work together to develop along with the insight and guidance from your colleagues at health centers and primary care associations, and that you will be able to locate resources to help recruit and support an effective Chief Workforce Officer. As we prepare to go into the learning for this session, we want to get a sense of who's in the room. So we go to the next slide. We want you to respond to this poll question, and you should see the poll question pop off just to the right side of your screen or pop up there. Let us know if you're currently serving as a Chief Workforce Officer, or if you are not a Chief Workforce Officer but serving in what you might consider an equivalent role within your organization, or if you're not a Chief Workforce Officer but interested in learning more and exploring. So please let us know who's in the room by responding to the polling question. We'll give you just a few moments to do that. And we certainly appreciate all of you taking the time to join us this morning for this session. We're excited about sharing what's to come with the Chief Workforce Officer Toolkit that you'll hear about in a short while during this session. So I think our poll is preparing to close. Hopefully we will see those results here momentarily, and they have shown up. Wow, it looks like the majority of those attending today are not Chief Workforce Officers, but are interested in learning more and exploring. And there are a few that are about 10% that are in CWO equivalent roles. And we're not necessarily surprised by this, but we're excited that you've chosen to join us today, and thank you for responding to the poll. So with that, why don't we learn a little bit more about this role and what the role involves? And so why don't we give our attention to my colleague, Michelle Fernandez. Michelle?
Thank you, Gerard. Yes, so I'm just going to spend a few minutes really laying down the foundation of what is a CWO, who they are, why it's important, so really answering those questions. So just to start with a basic understanding, a definition that we can all use as we go through this presentation is a CWO is a high-level staff member in a continuously evolving role. And we really want to point that out, that this is an evolving role. And they're dedicated to developing, monitoring, and improving the workforce plan. Now, when we look at the point that I made regarding an evolving role, really, you know, a CWO can incorporate many different titles, so it does not have to be someone who is necessarily titled a Chief Workforce Officer, but really the key is that they're working within that space of their focus is workforce, their focus is on developing the workforce, being able to monitor what the workforce needs, and ultimately improving the workforce for the health center in order for the health center to be able to advance in that area. Also, a CWO is going to look different from each type of health center. So there may be rural health centers, urban health centers, small health centers, big health centers. It's really about learning together as to how to fit this role into the health center and understanding what are the needs of that population, that community, and all of the different factors that go into how establishing a strong workforce for that specific health center. So I really just want to point that out, that there's not one key way to look at this, but we can have this core definition that we can all use when we talk about a chief workforce officer. So going into the next slide, we also wanted to be able to answer, what does a CWO do? So if we talk about this being an evolving role, we talk about this being, a role that can have different titles, that someone can sort of start from the beginning and move into that role. What we have done here at ACU in collaboration with NACHC is develop core competencies that explain what this role does and what a CWO really needs in order to advance in the role and what are the key areas. So part of those core competencies is we created these 8 domain areas, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, this toolkit that we've put together. But I just want to talk about the key core areas. So we have team growth and development, strategy and innovation, professionalism, personal integrity, effectiveness, cultural humility, organizational leadership and effectiveness, partnership and collaboration, resiliency and joy in work, and ultimately workforce optimization. So these are very broad, as you can see. And obviously, again, not every CWO is going to need to be an expert in all of these areas. Every health center's need is different. But what these core competencies in this toolkit that we'll ultimately put out, what it really is about letting the health centers know and understand what that role is, and then how they can plan for and recruit a CWO. This is also very helpful when we're addressing sort of starting this position on a smaller scale, because that's really how a lot of this kind of works. We start at a smaller scale and then we can kind of grow from there. This is especially true, as you mentioned, some, smaller health centers, rural health centers that may not have as many individuals in order to sort of meet that CWO role in order for them to be able to recruit for one. But you have that talent in your health center. You can build that up. You can move someone up who ultimately can be essential in that role. So as the health center grows, as it evolves, or even if it remains the same size, always keep in mind that, the workforce really is the fuel. And without that, we're not able to help the patients in the way that we want to. So this should be a fundamental part of what we're looking at when we think about our health centers and what they need to thrive. And then let me just go to the next slide. So the next question we wanted to answer was, well, when do we need to do this? And the answer that I'm going to put out there is like, if not now, then when? And what we really wanted to highlight was that HRSA really is taking a very big sort of strong focus on workforce because they understand how important this is. So I just hear, this was taken from a HRSA presentation, and they are looking at health center excellence. And one of those performance areas is specifically workforce. So you can see here that they also have their definition, and they have 5 key areas that they're looking at when it comes to workforce. And the CWO is really someone that does that strategic management overall, that takes, look into recruitment, that employee development, engagement, retention. And at ACU, we also have these core components that enhance how we talk about these performance expectations from HRSA. So everything else from compensation to cultural competency in regards to our workforce. So this is something that is at the forefront of what HRSA is doing. They also have now started looking very strongly at funding opportunities, or they are doing funding opportunities to improve health professions training in health centers. So this is at the forefront of everything, and the CWO really is that key individual who is going to come in and strategically manage everything that is in regards to all of these performance areas, these core components that are essential. And then let me just go to the next slide. Sorry, my computer had a slight pause. I apologize. So this is the last slide that I'm going to go over before I pass it back to Gerard. And here it is. We want to talk, well, you know, we explain who the CWO is, you know, what they do, how we can know what they do. Now is the time. And then why are they so important? So as you can see here, the Chief Workforce Officer, and again, you know, that's the title we're using, but just to reiterate, it can have many different titles, but they are that leadership authority. They're an expert in analytics. They are the leader of the implementation team as we're looking at collecting data, what works for the workforce, what doesn't. And of course, they're an expert in workforce. So, you know, you wouldn't be able to do this role if you didn't have that expertise. And again, it's either someone who can come in with that expertise, or in the health center, we can build them up to have that expertise. Also, one of the key areas that a Chief Workforce Officer does is being able to put forth a workforce plan, which is essential to any health center. And this is really where you're able to analyze what are your successes, what are your failures. Those two are just as important. Being able to collect the data of what works and what doesn't. I've said this in a few other presentations that I've done with what is currently going on with the pandemic. You know, everything is changing so rapidly that you may not realize that you're actually looking at a lot of data that you may be able to use of like, wow, you know, telehealth is really working very well for some people, but for other people, this may not be what they prefer. So, you know, you're already kind of doing that testing without almost setting up a test. So, you know, take that information that you have, and then as we sort of move out of this crisis that has happened, we're able to take these lessons learned and move from there. So again, this is why this role is so important, because you want someone who has that expertise, but is also able to lead the charge in all of this to make sure that our workforce is not only prepared, but also, you know, enjoys and wants to be part of the work that they're doing. So that was it for my portion. I wanted to just kind of go through it quickly because our focus really is going to be on Kathy and Rosa and the expertise that they bring to this area. So Gerard, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to you. And what we're going to do is first we're going to do an interview with both of them, and then we're going to have an open dialogue.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for helping to set the context for our discussion, helping us to appreciate the why of the Chief Workforce Officer, the importance of this role, and both who, when, and how that role might be implemented and engaged within a health center to help meet the workforce strategy needs. Now we want to, as Michelle mentioned, we want to sort of look at just how this role is being implemented in the field, or where the rubber meets the road, if you will. And so we are going to interview both Kathy Brieger at Hudson River Healthcare and Rosa Agosto at Urban Health Plan. So we want to, why don't we take a moment to invite first Kathy, if you will, to tell us a little bit about Hudson River Healthcare and the population that you serve.
So hello, everybody. It's so good to see well, not to see everybody, but it's good to be here at another great ACU conference. I wanted to kind of lay the stage for our work at HRH Care in this area, and it really began many years ago. As I'm showing you the very large network that we are now, when we first started this work, we were just a few health centers. I think we had 3 health centers at the time. So as a beginning to describe our center, right now we have 43 health center sites with over 2,000 employees. We're serving 245,000 patients across the Hudson Valley, New York City, and Long Island. Our health centers are now serving all 5 boroughs of New York City, and this came as a result of a merge with Brightpoint Health. Next slide. We have, if you could see this is a picture graphic of New York State, and then the blue dots represent where we are, and you can see we're in the very rural area of Columbia County. And this is where, you know, when you look at the Ulster County and Dutchess, Orange County where I live, these are very small areas, rural areas. And then some of the more suburban, and then you're getting to be urban areas in the city, Westchester. Of course, Westchester, our current known call to fame is that we were where one of the first outbreaks of the coronavirus happened. Nice highlight there. And then we also have blue dots all the way out in Long Island, and representing many different sizes of health centers, some very small and some very large. Next slide. We have a lot of special populations, which is unusual. Many times if you're an urban site, you might focus on public housing and homeless veterans. But in our situation, because we have so many different geographies, we're looking at agricultural workers, homeless individuals, public housing, veterans, HIV positive patients, and then those with substance abuse disorder. But I look at some of our growing populations as we change our geographic footprint. We're also changing some of the compositions. Next slide. And that is with urban.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Definitely quite a bit of diversity there. And now we'll turn our attention to Rosa Augusto with Urban Health Plan. Rosa, tell us a little bit about Urban Health Plan and the populations that you serve. You may be muted, Rosa.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So if I can just, this is just slide. It's my name and my title, and the year of hope I call 2020. So the next slide was, yes, it's the year of hope and really aspirations. So we've worked intentionally and sometimes not so intentional about in workforce, but intentional and I think keeping an open mind and being embracing and inclusive kind of leads you to some of the recognition that we've received. So we, as you can see there, we've received national recognition, and the Columbia University Aging Center, for example, which is an HMAR Employer Award, they actually came to me and asked me to apply for the award because they had heard about a wide spectrum of ages. And so we had someone who was like 84 in a position, and then we had just hired someone who was 18. And all these people working side by side. So inclusivity, I think it's a factor in workforce development. And of course, our onboarding program, which has been recognized by Brandon Hall in research. And the next slide will show you the communities where we are, and we are concentrated. We are in New York City. We are in urban areas, and sometimes I think that many of our neighborhoods that are poor and that are at the periphery of life and are often overlooked by many. For example, the South Bronx, Corona, Queens, that really truly the epicenter of this horrible pandemic, primarily because of so many people who are undocumented and live in such overcrowded conditions. In many ways, sometimes, because of lack of services and because of lack of resources, resemble rural areas and behave very similarly, I mean, in terms of dynamics as those areas. So South Bronx, we have many centers there. One huge center in Corona, Queens, that is sort of it's like a community center. It's the center of life there. And then we acquire one in Central Harlem. And as I like to think, I was one of the people that said that center is not going to be successful. Harlem has gentrified to such a degree, but we find that the center is thriving, is alive, is serving a population that has been sort of ignore in the middle of gentrification. And then my final slide, which is in terms of describing urban. So this is really tells you the number of people we serve, the number of individual patients, and we, in addition to individual patients, we do a lot of work with the community directly. We do workforce development, job placement. And we, of course, have WIC, and we have a maternal infant and health program. And one of the things that I am particularly very proud of is our charter school, Dr. Richard Izquierdo Health and Science Charter School, our founder, who actually passed away at the end of June, and that's Paloma's dad, our CEO. And that school has over 800 or close to 800 students, grades 6 to 12, that are really built into a workforce pipeline for not only for our centers, but for any center. We have over 1,000 staff. And in terms of the numbers, one of the things I think a chief workforce officer, and we'll go in a little bit more into that, I think Kathy and I have that, we have background and experience in program development and in actually providing a service beyond the traditional role of looking at workforce. We know what the job is about because we, in many ways, have done the job. And because of that, I maintain a few programs, and I have a program that's Healthy Livable Communities. It's a place-based initiative trying to really transform a community. And because of the pandemic, we pivoted that, and we have served over 6,000 hot meals and over 2,000 food boxes, and distributed hundreds of disinfectants, women's supplies, and baby supplies over the last 5 months. So I think that's crucial, knowing program in order to be able to develop people who run the programs. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosa, for providing that context for us. We do want to just take a moment to extend condolences on the loss of your founder. We know that's truly a great loss to the community, and certainly to Paloma personally. So why don't we look, and your comments help to sort of bridge us to our first question, and we'll go back and forth between Kathy and Rosa in responding to these questions. So why don't we start with Kathy? What does your role involve, Kathy?
So I think, as Rosa mentioned, sometimes being involved from the very beginning and seeing how staff members really needed support and guidance, from the ground up, really began for me in the HRH care back in the 90s, when we started to look at what were some of the positions that were available and what were the things that people needed to develop into the best that they could be. And so the Plaintree Institute, for many of you may not know this, but this is an international institute, and HRH Care is the only FQHC which is recognized as a silver level organization. But that organization really focuses on staff empowerment, looking at staff engagement, joy in work, all the things that we've talked about, and also as it relates to patients. How does this all impact the patients, and how do we include patients? So I see a lot of the work that we did in the early days came as a result of the Plaintree Institute. I also, even though I started as a clinician, I'm a registered dietitian, and I was a specialist in diabetes, I still actually do some work in that area just to keep my fingers in that pot. I felt that I also took a role in HR for several years that helped me see how do we frame things, how do we develop career ladders that will help us. But I would have to say that looking at this in HRH Care, it's been the Plaintree Institute, which has been the vehicle that under which we've looked at all of the work we've done. And so this role for us is fairly new, Chief Workforce Officer, and we're sorting out how do we negotiate between the role of a person in HR and the people that are working in workforce. And I think that is always a challenge. But I want to just say that when we were very small and you started in the 90s, we only had a few sites. So it wasn't, you don't have to be a large health center to think about how this can work. And it started by having conversations with teams of staff members. And this included people who were maybe a medical assistant who aspired to become nurses, and also patient representatives or the front desk folks who wanted to have a better, a higher level role. So as we talk, I'll mention a few of these people and how we've kind of fostered that. It's also, the role has also morphed a lot into looking at all skills that are needed, including something you'll hear about lean a little bit, but we also work with some of the coaching skills that are needed. And this is from coaching skills by doctors who are now supervising other doctors, or by front desk people who are now supervising a whole site. So you'll hear a little bit more about this, but we can go to the next slide. So our affiliation with Plaintree really helped us to look at how do we support staff, creating opportunities for them to have exposure to empathetic skills in conversation. How do we also look at enhancing skills that may not even be understood by the staff member themselves? And I think some of the training that we did in development really focused on workforce areas. One of the biggest things, and I'd have to say that we struggled with, we had staff who were very insecure, and people who were coming from the community. This could be somebody who was had just graduated high school, maybe had never taken a college course. How would they might have been excellent with their skills in processing paperwork or in working with patients, or even rooming patients, doing vitals, and yet they felt insecure or uncomfortable about sharing their knowledge. So part of the role of this workforce officer included coaching them in a number of areas to actually have that confidence. So sometimes things became really apparent to us as we were doing this program, because we really had no roadmap. As Rosa will probably say, we had no roadmap to follow. But sometimes by being engaged in these programs, in anything from just, being aware as a supervisor, or just listening to people, which is probably one of the most important things. Next slide, please. Great. So looking at the competencies, and I think we can both talk about this, when I look at, what is important as a chief workforce officer, I think this idea of cultural competence, being aware of what biases may exist. I know in a training we had yesterday, a Plaintree training, we talked a lot about how people come to this work, and we may have biases that impact us, even being able to advance, or even thinking that we might be possible for a position. I think that awareness of human resource skills are really important, and that is not that you're going to be a human resource officer, but you need to have some understanding of what people are capable of, maybe how to assess them, how to assess skills, and what resources might be available for people to be able to go to the next level. And I'll give you an example of somebody who might come in with limited English skills. They have no confidence in presenting, and they may not be able to participate in meetings. One of the things I think that was really helpful is to have people say, look, maybe they take an English proficiency class, or one that they can practice presenting. Knowledge of operations, and I'll include awareness of HRSA. I think that one of the things that we see is we have, if you don't know what's needed in the future from HRSA or from BIPIC, from the Bureau of Primary Health Care, and if you don't know what's happening in the health centers, you're not going to be an effective chief workforce officer. I think that's the bottom line. You have to know what's going on. So you can't really be in administration without getting boots on the ground and actually having discussions with people who are doing this work. So I also know the idea of data and being aware of data and analytical, information. I know I've learned a lot from our lean program, and using, all kinds of Pareto charts and all other things that I might not have had before. And I think that has helped me in a number of areas, but I do believe that is critical to this role, because in analyzing, I'm thinking of all the data that we analyze for staff engagement, satisfaction. If we don't understand the data, we might be going in the wrong direction. So I do feel that that's a very important thing. Having knowledge of what adult learners, how do people learn, and that goes for whether you're a doctor, an administrator, or a frontline staff member, knowing that people don't learn by lecture, often it has to be some type of experiential learning. And so I think that as a chief workforce officer, making sure that your learning is focusing on maybe a combination of didactic and experiential programs really is important. And then the last thing, knowledge of how to do online. We've had to move a lot of our training to online. And as we learn, some of these things actually are more effective as long as you can use the online platform well, which I guess we're all learning how to be expert. So those are just some things, and I can think of probably 100 other things fitting into this, but my one strong recommendation is that when you're looking at this position, having a real concrete knowledge of what is happening in your health center so that you're not talking from an ivory tower and not really connecting with what's happening on the ground. So people look at you like, hey, that person doesn't know what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. The next slide, I think, is my last one. I think this is for Rosa, too, to talk about. So, you know, I look at, okay, why at HRH Care, why did we create this position? And I think, you know, for years we've had these, we've had an ECHO program, which is Exploring Careers in Healthcare Opportunity. And some of the folks, actually our assistant dental director is actually somebody who started here as a high school kid and became familiar with this. And we have people all around our health system that have started here. And I think that's a great testament. We've had people who were farm workers who became WIC clerks and then have expanded their jobs. And I think that when we identify the skills and knowledge gap of some of these community members, that's an important link of what do we do as a chief workforce officer. When we look at staff satisfaction surveys, this is also extremely important because we're seeing that in order to engage staff and to make them feel like there is a future, you need to have some kind of career ladders and have this be known because people will see themselves thinking, I'm stuck in this position, I can't move forward. And that really is not a good way to instill joy and a sense of fun in any kind of job. And this work is also separate. HRH Care, I think our CEO, Ann Nolan, saw this as being separate from the HR role. And it's important to be separate because I think sometimes HR is more about the nuts and bolts of what happens, processing paperwork, looking at interviewing skills, those kind of things, where this chief workforce officer really looks at the strategic picture. What do we need to be, a great health center? What do we need to foster this idea of being a real change agent in the communities that we serve? How do we look at what staff are looking for, and that includes, millennials or, whoever it is, or even diverse communities that we are in, whether you're in Corona, Queens, or, upstate rural Hudson, New York, what are the things that people are looking for, and strategically trying to create opportunities for people to develop into the best people they can be, the most successful people they can be. I think that was HRH Care's, our thinking when we created this. I think that might be my last slide, right? I think that's, if you can forward it, I think.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, Gerard.
Thank you very much, Kathy. We appreciate you helping us to appreciate just what the role involves for you at the Plaintree Institute and Hudson River Healthcare, those key competencies, and why the organization chose to invest in the role. Rosa, we'll ask you those same questions. Tell us a little bit about what the role involves, its key competencies, and why Urban Health Plan has made the investment.
Yeah, so it's hard to follow Kathy because everything she said, I could just say ditto. So, but I'll just try to sort of individualize the experience to our organization. When our CEO looked at sort of a learning center, if you will, sort of the capacity to internally develop people. And I say internally for us to be able to, in many ways, not control in your autocratic way, but be able to manage and monitor internally the growth of our staff so that we can really help them. This is particularly true when you think about that if QAC is really hired from the community, which means that our staff, especially our frontline staff, are very much like our patients, right? So we know that they bring the challenges and the beauty that our patients bring to the door. So if we invest all of that in patients, in to heal and to be able to take them to a different place, we needed to do the same thing for those patients who were our staff. So that's kind of like the beginning. And of course, that grew into a more comprehensive look at sort of the development picture of the development profile of someone in a role that's very similar to the chief workforce development role. So I think that so it becomes more forward-looking. So you look at what you have in order to know what you need to grow, to move forward. So that's the evolution of the role. So it's not just about, providing compliance training or just developing people in terms of for them to do their jobs, but what is it that the organization needs? So it's an organizational development role that I think works hand in hand with the CEO and the executive team. One of the things that I'm sure that Kathy will agree with me, that I didn't hear her mention, but I'm sure it's part of what's in the role. It's really the ability, one, to be engaging. If I would dare say that many HR departments would not be happy if we see them exclusively as people who complete paperwork and follow in compliance, and that they aspire to do very similar work to the one that Kathy described and that we are involved in. That I think is up to an organization to look at how do you blend that and how do you grow that, especially if you're small. But like HRH Care at Urban Health Plan, our CEO wanted this role and this work to be separate from your traditional HR role. But that doesn't mean that it cannot be one, in all honesty, and that it cannot move in that direction, or particularly maybe beginning. So one of the things that I was going to say, actually, I started and I didn't. One, you need to be engaging. You really need to be able to influence people and bring them over to you and embrace them and have them embrace you back. And that's not only internally, but in order to do our work and in order for us to plan and in order for us to be a workforce type of person, we really need to be able to establish partnerships with the external world. A significant portion of my job is with the universities, with the Korean trade schools, with government, with funders, but most of how do you work with institutions that of higher learning so that they can be responsive to your workforce needs as well. So, and the ability to work together and establish those partnerships. And then the final thing is that you really need to understand labor. Whether you are a union shop or not, you really need to understand labor dynamics. And on top of that, you also need to understand the labor market and where do you fit in and where does your growth and your vision for your organization fit in into that. So I think that's I don't know. I think I answered that question.
Yeah, Rosa, you did excellent. And I realized I think Gerard was having some technical issues. So I am just going to go ahead and continue. There were a few more slides, but we really wanted this to be, as I said, an open dialogue. So for all the participants, these slides will be made available to you. But Rosa and Kathy really also spoke to, these differences between the CWO and the Chief Human Resources Office, and then as well as what are the benefits of a CWO. I really wanted to go back to this slide and ask both of you to really expand on that of, why is a CWO so important? What are its benefits? But also, what do you need to get there, to get to that role?
I think, Rosa hit the nail on the head when you said, in order to get the maximum use out of this position, connecting with whatever resources are available. So for us, up in Columbia County, we might have the community college, but down in Long Island, it may be something else. So trying to sort through and learn who the resources are, where the resources are. Sometimes they're national, things that people can get certified on, by using some internet, which is great. That makes it even better. But I think when you look at what are the benefits of this role, it's that knowledge of community resources and how they can really help the staff to become more prepared, more effective staff members, more effective as even just in their regular interactions with their team members. But also it gives people a sense of mobility, that they are able to actually do something bigger and better, and that when this happens, is staff engagement. You'll see staff engagement increase when they feel like there is a ladder. Even if, if they're a doctor on the front lines and they feel, hey, look, I want to become a site medical director. Maybe I want to become the medical director, but there's some way they can really learn more. Or if they are somebody who's working in operations and they see a bigger role for them in another aspect of the work we do. If there are career ladders, sometimes that could be helpful. And I think that when teams are more effective, obviously productivity, effectiveness, patient experience, all those scores go up. And then I think when I also look at this, I think that as you develop staff with the skill sets, people feel like, hey, if my organization is investing in me, I must be worth something. Because, and I think Rosa hit on something here, in that if we're hiring people from the communities, and that's what I feel, this is important for us, that we're really having to look at people who've been disenfranchised, not invested in, really thought of as being the people who are not worth anything. And if they join an organization that says, no, we know you have potential and we are investing in you, that can really, talk about longevity of your organization and turnover rates. It changes that whole picture.
That's, can I just jump in?
Please, please.
Yeah. So so when we, and healthcare, as we all know, is the most dichotomous, right? Or way of doing business. You have the highest level professionals and highly credentialed and prepare individuals, MDs, et cetera, and specialists. And then you have your frontline people who are just coming off into your building who you may have seen in the clinic as a patient, with many of those special needs that Kathy described at the beginning. So you're not only preparing them, so that investment comes from there. You're not only preparing them to work based on whatever skills they may have, but you're also helping them understand the dynamics of a professional organization. And you have to be patient, and you have to be empathic, and you have to be able to understand where they come from. So I think that at this particular time, I would venture to say that this year has taught us a lot of lessons, right? And there are two things. One, we had to pivot, a word that my young colleagues use a lot. In terms of our work, how do we do this virtually? Everything that we're talking about, how do we do it virtually? And at the beginning, I wasn't thinking about that much, except doing the compliance-driven stuff. And you lose your culture. We worked really hard and workforce, the chief work officer in many ways is the keeper of the culture, even though other people may say they are by virtue of driving events. When you hold the future of your staff in your hands with development, then you're in many ways, you are a key person and the keeper of your culture. So how do we integrate culture into the work that we're doing online? And I'm starting to think about that. And Kathy, I would love to talk to you about this some more. Yeah. And I think that because of the many because of the pandemic and everything else that's going on in the country and in the world, I think that we need to be really also pivot to a trauma-informed care model. So SQACs, by virtue of our work and by virtue of our roots and our ways of doing business, I think we have all those elements. Now, how do we take all those elements and now also infuse that into a different culture. So I think a workforce development of chief workforce officer allows you to provide the structure for that level of development, provides the deployment and the monitoring and the surveying.
You know, yesterday I had a very interesting conversation. We had a live training, which was our first culture training. I think Amanda Moody is on the phone call today too, who we worked together on this. And two things that came up that made me think about Chief Workforce Officer. One of the peers who works with our MAT program, our medically assisted therapy, she actually talked about her experience as a patient coming in 5 years ago with her husband, rather, and how the care and the kindness that was expressed to her as a patient, a family of a patient, really made her want to work in this place. And so somebody like that who's coming in with the knowledge really can be an effective support when you're talking about teaching people, which kind of leads me to this slide. So she was a great example of how, some of the work we do now can actually have her involved with some of the development of the workforce. The other, the faces here, I wanted to just talk briefly. Amy on the left, Amy was when I first hired her, she was a WIC clerk, and which was one of the entry-level positions. And Amy just graduated high school and was a young mom, and very shy, didn't want to speak, but we ended up, she's a very smart young woman, and you could see great potential. So we've kind of over the years encouraged her to go back to college, but also we made her part of the faculty to teach front desk people. So she ended up getting promoted all along the way, front desk, then she went to be operations, then she went to become an operations manager. Now she's a practice manager who oversees 4 very large sites. But one of the funny things was Amy didn't want to give any presentations, but we made her the faculty member, so she had to. So over the years, she became very good at this. And then about 3 years ago, I had her do a presentation for the board of directors, which is the ultimate. And I just laughed with Amy and said, remember when you didn't want to, you couldn't do this, and now you are doing this great presentation. And then we have Olga Bracero in the middle. Her picture, she actually was a farm worker that I met, it might be 25 years ago.
Wow.
And she really had some great skills and great people skills. And so we hired her again. It was WIC. We hired her in the WIC program for outreach. And then she became an outreach worker in our migrant health program. Then she became a patient representative. And now she's doing navigation work. So she's great because she really understands what it's like, where to get services, and she's just beautiful. And the end is not done because she's a young woman. Then you have Benny, Maria Solos on the right, and she actually, I met her. She worked at a Head Start program for migrant children, and again, I had her. I thought she has great skills, and we really could use her in the health center. So I actually recruited her, and now she's been with us for over 20 years and really done great work on coordinating a lot in one of our centers. But I want to say that these are just some people who are examples of people who came from maybe frontline positions and who maybe came from the outside with not a lot of skills. I do want to say that when you think about leaders, administrators, and physicians who are also in this whole workforce area, looking at how do we get to be, how do we connect and actually expand our skills. And that has my last story, and that was from yesterday. One of the dentists who's come to us from Puerto Rico, he actually very much right in tune with our culture. And he talked about a woman who he had seen 3 days ago who had done some cosmetic work and for her teeth. And the woman, when he showed her the mirror and let her see what she looked like, she started to cry. And she said, my son was killed a year ago. He was 21. He was stabbed to death. And I just got my photograph of the ceremony, and my teeth, I couldn't, I couldn't open my mouth because I was so embarrassed or ashamed about my teeth. She said, today I can be, out of the terrible things that have happened, I can be proud of this. But what made me think about Chief Workforce Officer, he talked a lot about how mental health and dental are so tied together because how people look and feel about themselves. So I thought it really tied in with their dental image. So I just thought this is something we need to do some more work around, working together with people in the mental health, behavioral health area and dentistry, because that is an area I thought, wow, we haven't done anything about that. But anyway, so sometimes things come up and out of the blue, but you just have to be open to them as a chief workforce officer.
Yeah. Curiosity helps.
Yes,
yeah.
Curiosity.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I am just keeping an eye on the time. One of the things that, and as I mentioned, we wanted this to be an open dialogue, so we had some slides sort of guide through. But I think that they spoke to all the slides because we had one more, but I know, Kathy, you also talked about Lean and how you've used it. So before we begin to wrap up, do you have any other personal stories you may like to share? I think being able to share those personal stories are very powerful in the same way that Kathy just did.
Oh, yeah, I think that the Kathy's stories, of course, overlap with the stories that we have. And I don't have slides for particular people, but one of the great, I think that oh my God, there's so many great stories that the person who's actually I would say the person who works side by side with me, and who just got accepted into graduate school for an organizational degree, for a development degree, walked into our offices on a Friday, rainy day, and I happened to be going by the hallway where she was waiting for anyone to talk to her. She was looking for an internship, and she took the chance of going up to our offices, and we're not located inside the clinic, so you really have to seek us out. We have another building. She came in as an intern, and now she's getting her master's, and she's doing amazing work. I really, to some degree, could not function without her. She quickly became somebody who influenced me, a young woman, rapidly from the community, young mom, had, she looks like she's 10. She has a kid who's 19, 20, but really has grown. One of our analytics person in IT was one of the facility guys, maybe 25 years ago. This is one of Paloma's, I think, greatest stories on how this young man was sweeping the floor and now is a really high-level data person. And actually, his boss also came in, and one of those, his boss was I think he's a brilliant man, a Renaissance man, if you will, also came in to the organization as a summer youth employment worker. So he was also from the community and has grown and grown. And we have many stories of that sort of people who are in that what they needed in life was, one, opportunity, two, being embraced, three, somebody being patient with them, and four, somebody with the skills to be able to see their potential and help them gain their potential.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think that really highlights this idea of this is an evolving role and how important workforce is for our community, the patients that we serve, and the people who work in the health centers. So we're just going to begin to wrap up. I know Gerard is back, but I believe only on the phone. Gerard, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. So we just want to sort of give everybody just a very quick overview of what's coming up. I had mentioned the CWO Toolkit. This includes core competencies that ACU created in partnership with NAC. We also have a CWO job description template. So once this is out, any health center, it is a Word document, can use it, put in their name and put it out there for any recruitment that they may be doing for a CWO role. Both Rosa and spoke to this. What really is that CWO and the CHR? And we have a Venn diagram that kind of lays that out, hopefully, very clearly, so you can just take a look, see what it is, and then currently available, there are CWO podcasts, and actually we've interviewed both Kathy and Rosa in this. Sabrina Edgington, she interviewed Kathy, and I had the pleasure of interviewing Rosa. And this links in our STAR Center, directly to those podcasts. So when you get this PowerPoint, which will be in our Crowd Compass, you can just click the link right there or go to our STAR Center website, which is chcworkforce.org, and listen to the podcast and all of the valuable information that they gave us here. You just get more of that in the podcast. And then, Gerard, I know that we wanted to be able to thank the advisory group who helped us put together these core competencies. So, Gerard, would you like to say anything?
Absolutely. Thank you, Michelle. Just listening to Rosa and to Kathy, we could listen to them for hours, share their experiences, share their insights that are applicable to the role of Chief Workforce Officer. It helps to illustrate just why we accepted their applications to serve on the Chief Workforce Officer Toolkit Advisory Group. So we want to just acknowledge both them and the other members of that advisory group for their service and for helping to develop the toolkit. I do think we also want to acknowledge the support from the Bureau of Primary Health Care and HRSA for their support for the development of the toolkit as well. So just want to thank those the members of that group.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much to everyone. I am going to pass it back to Suzanne. I know we are at time, but I wanted to see if anybody, has any questions. Please go ahead and submit them in the chat. I've seen a lot of thank yous to both Rosa and Kathy in the chat, and from us here at ACU, thank you so much to both of you, as well as Gerard. But if you have any questions as Suzanne wraps up, if you want to put them in the chat, we can maybe just very quickly just do an extra minute or two. Oh, Suzanne, you are on mute.
I had double muted myself. I'm so sorry, you guys. It's Friday. So thank you again to all of our presenters, Kathy and Rosa and Gerard and Michelle. I know that this work is so important to obviously Kathy and Rosa, but it's also really important to us at ACU and NAC as well. So thank you guys for your wonderful presentation and your work on the toolkit. You've really been an integral part of what we have been able to do together as NAC and ACU. So next slide, please. Michelle, am I I am the presenter. I'm so sorry. I thought you were still presenter. Sorry, you guys.
No worries.
I'm having all kinds of difficulties this afternoon. So anyway, thank you again. I don't see any questions that have come on. So just want to remind everyone to fill out your session evaluation, especially if you're doing CMEs. And if not, please still do that. That would be a huge help for us. And up next during our virtual conference is our closing keynote. You don't want to miss this. This is amazing. I'm so excited to hear this presentation. It's called Extreme Makeover Healthcare Edition. And so we've got a wonderful presenter, and you don't want to miss it. So with that, again, thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate you guys being with us today, hearing this exciting presentation and conversation. Thank you again to all of our presenters. I hope you guys have a great day.
Likewise.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody.